The war had a way of stripping men down to their rawest selves, leaving little room for softness, for compassion. Yet, even amid the cracked earth and endless echoes of gunfire in Afghanistan, Sergeant James Miller discovered something that reminded him of humanity's gentlest side. James was a UK soldier in his late 20s, hardened by months of deployment, yet he carried in him a quiet tenderness that no amount of combat could erase. On one scorching afternoon, while his platoon took cover in the shell of a ruined village, James noticed movement among the debris. At first, he thought it might be a civilian child left behind, but as he drew closer, he saw a frail stray dog. Its fur was matted with mud, its ribs jutting out, and one of its paws dragged slightly, injured and raw. The animal's eyes, though clouded with fear, held a glimmer of desperate hope. One of his comrades shook his head. "Leave it, Sarge, it won't survive out here. No point in wasting rations." Another added, half joking, "You want to bring a pet into a war zone? We've got enough trouble keeping ourselves alive." But James couldn't walk away. He knelt down, reached into his pack, and broke a piece of his ration bar. Holding it out slowly, he waited. The dog hesitated, trembling, then crept forward and devoured the food, licking his fingers afterward. James smiled faintly and whispered, "Easy there, boy. You're safe now." That was the moment the bond began. The dog, whom James named Shadow because of how he silently followed them, became part of the unit. At first, he was seen as a nuisance, but very quickly, Shadow earned respect. His keen senses saved lives. On one patrol, he froze in place, growling at a patch of ground the soldiers would have walked across without thinking. His instinct stopped them, and upon closer inspection, they discovered a hidden IED. The men exchanged nervous glances, realizing Shadow had spared them from certain death. From then on, no one questioned his presence. Shadow wasn't just a stray anymore, he was one of them. In the lonely desert nights, when exhaustion gnawed at James and the weight of war pressed heavily on his mind, Shadow became his comfort. The dog would curl against him, a warm, steady presence that reminded James of home. Letters from his wife Emily often described how difficult it was raising their 2 children alone in Manchester. She missed him terribly, and the kids asked constantly when he'd come back. James would write back, sometimes including lines about Shadow, telling the children, "Dad's got a guardian angel with 4 legs." When his deployment finally ended, James faced a decision. Leaving Shadow behind wasn't an option. With help from an animal rescue charity, he arranged transport for Shadow to the UK. The day the plane landed and Shadow bounded into James's arms at the airport, wagging his tail wildly, Emily and the children couldn't stop smiling. The once starving stray quickly adjusted to his new life. He became the children's playmate, Emily's loyal companion when James worked late, and a constant source of joy in their home. Years passed peacefully. Shadow grew older, his muzzle peppered with gray, but his spirit remained strong. He'd patrol the backyard like a soldier on duty, bark at strangers who walked too close to the fence, and rest by the front door every night as though guarding the family he now called his own. James often thought back to the war, to that moment he'd chosen compassion over indifference. He would stroke Shadow's fur and whisper, "Bringing you home was the best decision I ever made." One stormy autumn night, years after their lives had settled into a comfortable rhythm, Shadow's true purpose revealed itself again. The rain was relentless, lashing against the windows, and thunder rolled through the skies. James sat in the living room with a book, Emily upstairs tucking the children into bed. Shadow lay at his feet, twitching his ears occasionally at the storm. But suddenly, the dog's demeanor changed. His body stiffened, ears perked sharply, and a deep growl rumbled from his chest. He bolted toward the back door, barking furiously, claws scraping against the wood. James frowned. "What is it, boy?" he asked, but Shadow was relentless, his barking turning frantic. Emily came downstairs, her face pale with worry. "Maybe it's just the storm," she suggested, but James had learned long ago to trust Shadow's instincts. He unlocked the door and stepped out cautiously into the cold rain. At first, he saw nothing, but then movement caught his eye, 2 masked men attempting to pry open a side window with a crowbar. Before James could react, Shadow shot past him like lightning. Despite his age, the dog attacked with the same ferocity he had shown in Afghanistan. He lunged at one intruder, teeth sinking into the man's arm, forcing him to drop the crowbar. The second man cursed and tried to pull his partner free, but Shadow's barks filled the air, fierce and unyielding. James shouted, Emily screamed, and the children cried from upstairs as the chaos unfolded. The men, panicked by the sudden fury of the animal, tried to fight back, but Shadow refused to let them near the house. One intruder managed to strike Shadow with a glancing blow, but the dog held his ground, growling and snapping until the men realized they were losing. With curses and threats, they fled into the night, leaving behind the crowbar and a trail of blood where Shadow had bitten. Emily quickly called the police while James knelt beside Shadow, checking for injuries. The dog's side was scratched, bleeding lightly, but his eyes were sharp and unwavering. He stood guard at the doorway, chest heaving, until the sirens finally pierced the storm. When the police arrived, they confirmed the men had been terrorizing the neighborhood for weeks, breaking into homes while families slept. One officer crouched down to pat Shadow gently and said, "This dog's a hero. If it weren't for him, you could have been next on their list." That night, after the children finally calmed and the house grew quiet again, James sat beside Shadow on the living room floor. He gently cleaned the wound and whispered, "You saved us, boy. Just like you always have." His eyes filled with tears as he realized the full circle of their story. Years ago, he had saved a broken creature from the ruins of war. Tonight, that same creature had saved his family from danger in their own home. Emily, sitting beside him, stroked Shadow's fur and said softly, "Maybe this is why you found him. Maybe it was always meant to be." James nodded, pulling Shadow close, grateful beyond words. The children came downstairs, wrapping their little arms around the dog, whispering, "Thank you, Shadow. Thank you." From that night on, Shadow wasn't just a pet to the Miller family. He was a guardian, a hero, a living testament to the power of kindness. What began as a simple act of compassion in a distant land had rippled across years and oceans, returning in the most profound way possible. And though Shadow eventually grew old and frail, his story became a family legend, told and retold as proof that even in the darkest moments, kindness has a way of coming back, sometimes when you need it most, sometimes in the form of a loyal dog who was once nothing more than a stray in the rubble of war.